Okay,
Anyways,
so what's the topic?
So I wanted to talk about why we think that, or rather, why a lot of parents, and I think it was a lot in like our generation growing up. I think that new parents, like I think that millennial parents, or I guess later millennial parents, and then the next generations will probably have a different mindset just because of how involved with gaming we are, and how like I would say that like the later generation of millennials are probably. I don't know if this is actually backed up, but I would say that we're probably the ones who play games the most, or at least the ones who played the most as a kid continue to play as an adult. And so I wanted to talk about why my parents' generation view video games as such a waste of time in comparison to other activities. So like if I'm reading a book if I read a book for 6 hours, my mom would be thrilled. She would have said, great, you read an entire book. That's incredible. Here's another one. If I spent 6 hours playing a video game and I beat that video game, she would shame me and ask me why I'm playing so many video games. So there's this stigma around video games, and I feel like there's this concept that video games in comparison to other hobbies are this like giant waste of time. And I'm curious to see or hear your opinions on, I guess, like the pros and cons of that argument, or like does that argument have any merit? Do we think that we should be encouraging video games as a hobby, or is there something that's terribly destructive, demonic, and is it actually crippling to our society? So that's kind of like the launch off point. Do you guys have any thoughts?
I would say probably demonic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely demonic. Yeah.
I mean, my parents were the same way. I think specifically my mother. I think my father is really a closeted gamer at the end of the day. But my mother was always the person who was like, get off the games. I think it's just the technology aspect, because I think my mother is the same way for, like, if we were watching too much TV, she'd be like, all right, get up. And I mean, I think it's sort of interesting in that aspect where I think obviously there's more engagement with a game than like TV, but I guess at least depending on what you're watching, like at least with TV, I'm like engaging with, I don't want to say engaging with narrative, but like I don't play a lot of narrative driven games in the first place.
Yeah.
So I guess TV, at least I'm engaging to narrative, but I've said this before in terms of, like, there's been times in my life where I'm like, I really should watch less YouTube. I really should be watching less games and like reading more books. And a lot of the onus for that was me saying, like, there's not a lot of transferability in the experience I'm getting out of a video game versus like the experience I might get out of a popular book. I just recently reread Fahrenheit 451, and then I was able to like be in my job, which is a school, and like talk with other people who have engaged with that piece of media. In this case, have also read this book. Whereas like you guys are the only people I have to talk to about eugenics, and my fiance is kind of sick of me talking about it. So like it by playing games, or I mean, this is also true of like watching YouTube for me, it doesn't really help me like build community or like at least have interesting things to talk about with other people, because they don't care like what YouTubers I watch or like what games I've been playing. Which is why I really enjoy doing the podcast, because I have people to talk to about games who care.
That's so interesting that you say that, because it's like, I think I've connected with more people through video games than I have almost any other thing that I do, with the exception of, I would say the only other thing that I connect with people through more, and like strangers or like people that I work with, is music. Like, music is one of those things that,
Sure.
like, I listen to literally every genre. Well, I say literally every genre. I listen to a lot of genres over, and it's like, I can kind of relate to a lot of people over a lot of music. But I find that talking to people about video games is almost, I don't know, it almost feels easier in a lot of ways. And I guess that maybe that's just different social circles or just different areas that we're in. I wonder if being in like a school setting, like specifically for like work stuff, I mean, I guess stereotypically reading a book makes more sense to talk about. But
well, yeah, I mean, it's not to say that like I don't talk to people about games, and especially like, you know, we're at the point of the year where like I know my students well enough that I can be like, oh, hey, I've been playing this game, you might be interested. But I think, and you make a good point about like the generational gap, I think between probably like us and our parents' generation, of when there wasn't as much like community, and it wasn't as, I guess, like normalized of like a hobby or a thing to do, then it was sort of associated with like being social outcast and being a homebody. And, you know, the onus from my mother a lot of the time was like, hey, I want you to get off the game and go like engage with people. Go talk to people, go outside, get some fresh air.
yeah.
And as I would often argue with my mother about, I'm like, Mom, you know, like at the time, I'm on Skype talking with like we're hanging out, just like not physically in person. And I spent many, many, many nights of my life in front of a computer, just like on Skype with friends. But that wasn't true of our parents' generation. Like they couldn't just get on Skype or whatever platform they had.
But at the same time, it's like and like grandparents, they'd sit there and talk on the phone for hours. But that's different but like for some reason, that's different to them than if I'm on, like, for me, it was like MSN a lot, you know? Like, if I'm talking to someone through that, it was somehow different than talking on the phone. And same with, like, later on when I started playing multiplayer games, it's like me playing Halo Reach with my friend was different than her being on. Like, she would literally be upstairs having a conversation with, like, you know, her mom, her sisters, whatever. And I would be downstairs playing games. Me communicating through a game was somehow a lesser form of communication because there was also the activity of a game involved. But if she's talking on the phone for 4 hours, that's productive and that's being social. But for some reason, playing a multiplayer video game was not a social activity, which, maybe it's just a generational thing where it just wasn't like understood. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm not really sure.
Dempsey, any thoughts from the sick corner?
Well, I think I have a couple thoughts. I think like asking about like the sociability of it. The sociability of it is interesting because like, would like a TTRPG be more acceptable than a video game? Like, because I do not like, other than like in-person multiplayer games that I've played with people, I don't really connect video games with being social. I never play online very much.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not how I play video games. So I don't know. I think like I think there is something. I'm gonna defend the people who are skeptical of video games.
Okay.
I think. Oh, I was gonna say something insane.
You should do it,
please.
Well,
speak your truth.
I think I felt less. I don't know how I feel about this because I have. So, for example, I am single. And I definitely felt more comfortable playing video games for longer when I was in a relationship. Because I didn't need to go out and find a partner. But now, I think I definitely play less video games than when I was in a relationship. Because like I need to make time and go do other things that I would not otherwise do. And so I think that's one aspect of like, I think our generation is very physically isolated from each other. And there's a lot of like, we communicate through TikTok or, you know, through online spaces. And that seems like an isolating thing. And I think I don't know, like if I had a friend who was like, I don't know, complaining about being lonely and played a lot of video games, I think like, oh, like, well, like here's these non-video game things that are people who meet it up in like real spaces. Like I go to cleanups and environmental meetings and like a homeless feed on Fridays and things like that. And like the and I volunteer in other ways. But like doing the good work of those things is like secondary to like, this is how I meet people in my community. And so like, I think there is an aspect of like, and video games, they are like the ultimate convenience as well. Like there's very little friction compared to like, I don't know, I think like television would probably, but like, you know, compared to like hiking, or if you want to learn how to fly fish or woodwork, or, you know, knitting, get really into crochet or something like that. I think there's something really insidious about how little friction there is to video games that I think can strip some of the otherwise edifying aspects away from video games. So I do think there are reasons to be cautious of like quote unquote too many video games. And I think like there is this extreme example of someone maybe that our parents had in their heads when they were like, I think about the South Park character.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The World of Warcraft guy.
Yeah. And so I think that there's like these extreme examples. And the thing is that like video games are, I don't know, they're like made, they're like designed to facilitate that kind of interaction. Like they're made to be addictive. They're made to be like engaging, things like that. So I don't know. I don't think it's unreasonable to be really suspicious of video games. It's like, so Hank Green talks about this a lot. And like, we have less starvation now because our food is just better at giving us more calories. And like, it's not that the calories are bad. It's just that they taste so good and they're so dense. And I think that way about video games is like, we're like slowly perfecting this thing that used to be really rare. And when it was very rare, it had more value, like this interactivity, this like engagements, this like really like seamless flow states that you can get into very easily. Like the issue with it is like we kind of solved it. Like, oh, now we can have only the pleasing parts, like, and so much of it. So I don't know. I think I'm sympathetic.
So then, do you think that so kind of in that same vein, do you think that if we kind of went back, you know, like 30, well, I guess like 40 years at this point, and do you think that if we had like arcades as a medium still, or like if there were still like video game arcades that kids went to, or like, you know, adults went to? Because I mean, even as a kid, we had a couple. And like, it's a great way to meet people. I mean, as an adult, I mean, there's one place I could think of, but it's also a bar. So it's like, you know, but it's like, do you think that arcades kind of like solve that issue in a way where it kind of like allows you to, it adds some friction in where you have to like go to a real place to go and play these video games, where you're also kind of forced to interact with people in a way?
I mean, yeah. I think like those specific issues it would seem to solve.
I guess so. So
I think the problem is the games suck. I think that's
it is also
the problem is the games suck. Like I don't want to. Like I could sit down and play through like The Last of Us Part 2, like, you know, in chunks of 4 hours at a time. But I'm not going to play like Dig Dug and Street Fighter 2.
But what if we had like modern there is one modern arcade. It's like a barcade kind of. It's like an hour away from where I live, but I've been there a few times, and it's like they have screens set up with like they have one booth where it's a Switch, one booth where it's a GameCube, one booth where it's like an N64, an Xbox, whatever, and it's like you can play like a lot. So like people will be sitting there playing like Smash or Mario Party or Mario Kart. So it's like, but then they also have, you know, Dig Dug and Pac-Man and all that stuff. But there is some sort of modern element to it. Not that that's necessarily what we're talking about, but I mean, like these spaces exist, I guess, in modern times. They're just not. I think it's maybe because games have become so complex that they aren't like arcade games. Like a lot of games that we play today aren't, you know, kind of like meant to be played in 10-minute chunks, or aren't meant to be like, imagine if you were playing Hades, but every time you die you have to give it a quarter. Like that just sounds terrible. Well, because like the game is so long and you have to do that so many times. Like it's just not. I don't know. Also, Hades wouldn't work in an arcade because the runs are so long.
Yeah.
Like you can spend like 45 minutes on a run in Hades, and like that's not going to be arcade friendly.
You could do like Vampire Survivors.
Yeah. I feel like Vampire Survivors could be an arcade.
I was gonna say,
but
like I think there are 2 points, and I think one from each of you. I think like a lot of the criticism from games comes down to the isolating part of it.
Yeah.
Whereas even if I'm like talking with somebody, like I'm still like physically isolated from them. And I think it's that issue combined with Dempsey's point about the low friction of it. Like the game is designed in such a way that it's supposed to be like easy entertainment. Like it is supposed to be like a fairly frictionless experience. I mean, both as like a hobby, but also like narratively.
Yeah.
And like the whole experience is supposed to be fairly frictionless. And I think that's fairly easy to explain why, like, it's really easy for me to play 90 or 100 hours of Mugenics or whatever ridiculous amount of time I've put into this game versus like, yeah, I could have like read a book for all of that time and I would have gotten through like another couple books on my shelf. Or I could have like started learning Spanish. I had a revelation like a week or two ago. I realized I've played about like 1,000 hours of old school RuneScape.
Sick.
And I was like, if I had taken that time and I had just dedicated it to learning Spanish, like I would probably be like fairly fluent at this point.
Yeah, I've had that exact same thought.
Concerning thing.
Yeah, I've had that exact same thought with myself in Polish. Like my in-laws are Polish, and so I've been like slowly learning. And I'm like, yeah, if I had taken like all the time that I put into Marvel Rivals, which I think, but I haven't played it in a while, but I think like I put 200 hours into it. And I'm like, imagine what 200 hours of language lessons would have gotten me. But at the same time, it's like, I don't get as much enjoyment out of doing the lessons. And like overall, am I proud of the fact that I played Marvel Rivals for 200 hours? Like, is that something that I'm proud of? No. Would I have been prouder if I had learned Polish? Yes. But I also enjoyed myself a lot more. So.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like, I think that's part of the greater onus for that argument is just to be like, yeah, I mean, like I could have spent 1,000 hours learning Spanish, but like I wasn't going to.
Yeah, you weren't going to anyways.
It's not like a realistic expectation.
I think there's a couple different paths for this argument to go down. And that is like video games compared to other forms of media consumption.
Yeah.
Like video games compared to reading or cinema or TV or whatever, or painting or whatever, like going to an art museum or something like that. Or like looking at, like let's say you're not going to an art museum, but you're like studying Van Gogh's Wikipedia page and then like, you know, looking at all of his paintings.
I mean, my fiance does a lot of like watercolor paints when she just has a little sketchbook we bought like a week or two ago, and she's been doing a lot more watercolors recently. Yeah. So she's actually creating art.
Well, so I would say that like, I would say that video games, like, so that's one way to talk about it is like compared to other kind of like what I'm going to call sedentary artistic pursuits.
Sure.
Because I think like if you like, let's say I wanted to read, I don't know, Basquiat's biography or whatever. That's not going to get me out of the house with people, you know, or I play Dark Souls 3. It's the same thing as far as like getting out of the house, getting you moving and things like that. And so I think like there's video games compared to like active activities, like what I was giving as examples of like going to community events or volunteering in some capacity or things like that. But like also I would say like, okay, well, why are you watching any movies then? Because like movies don't get you close to those goals too. So like I think video games have to be compared to like only other sedentary art forms.
Sure.
Because like going back to like when I was in a relationship, I felt like, okay, like I felt less guilt about playing video games because like I felt like I was connecting with someone, whether that was like just them being around, and then like not just video games, but just going out less and being less active socially in general. Like I know that like now, like I've been single for a couple of years, and I do tend to like be more involved in my community now than when I was in a relationship and I would just stay home with my partner because I didn't feel the need to go out because like my social life was here. It's like, I think as far as like the isolating factor, I think video games feel different depending on like the kind of context you have in life. Like if you're playing with your, like if you're like doing parallel play where like you guys just in the living room together, like that can still feel like quality time in a way that like when you're single and just playing by yourself, that doesn't help any kind of connection. So I think there's something different about that. But I think like comparing video games to like other sedentary activities, I do think like criticizing video games loses a lot of teeth because I think like experiencing art, I don't think everyone has to be a creative. I think that like being an audience member is like really valuable and important. And I think if you only want to be an audience member, that's fine. Like if you only want to read and never write, I think that's fine. If you only want to watch movies and never make a movie, I think that's fine. And I think it's the same thing with video games. Like if you only want to experience video games, like just because like I'm not inventing chess too doesn't mean that my time with chess is less valuable because I am playing a game that's already made by someone else, you know?
Yeah.
Like I think, like I think the argument is more valuable when like video games as compared to like going outside, like touching grass activities, I guess. But like, the reason I bring it up is because I think we were kind of talking about both of those as if they were the same thing and they're not. But I think compared to other sedentary creative things, I think they're fine. I think video games are equal. Like I think like someone who I don't know, gets really into crocheting and someone who wants to make it through like every FromSoft game.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think those are equal in like quality. I think it's different. Like, yeah.
That was kind of like that was kind of one of the things I was like trying to get at was, you know, when I was younger, we would do family movie nights, right? So like every Friday we would go to Blockbuster or like our local movie store and we would go and we'd get 2 movies, or they would get 3 movies, sorry. So we would get one for the family, one for just the kids, and then one for just the adults. So it's like my mom and my stepdad would pick out a movie. We would all watch. I watched a couple of those when they weren't home, and boy, oh boy, did they pick some movies. So, but we'd go and we'd pick a family movie and we'd sit on Friday night and we would like get, you know, maybe we'd get like dinner in or something like that. Like we'd get a pizza and we'd all sit and watch a movie as a family. And that was kind of like, I would say it was like a mandatory event, right? So it's like, okay, we have to spend like together as a family. We're spending like 3 hours together and we're going to sit down and watch this movie. But we're all in a room. It's a dark room, just the TV. And we're all just sitting there quiet. Right? Like if we laugh, cool. But it's like, we're not making commentary. We're not talking to each other. This is like, we are all, you know, just experiencing this thing in silence together, basically. And like, that's how a lot of these, it's just kind of how movies are. It's why movies are a terrible first date. Like you don't take someone to the movies for a first date because you can't get to know someone while you're sitting there for 3 hours in a movie theater. Anyways, that's a whole other thing. But like, but if I were to, so I would like suggest similar things where I like grew up playing a lot of Mario Party with my friends. And it's like, hey, instead of watching a movie, why don't we play Mario Party? And it was always like, no, we cannot play the video game because the video game is like, it's like antisocial and lazy. But we could play like Scrabble or like Monopoly or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like, yeah. So that's kind of like the thing that like I was thinking about was like, why, what is it about the video game that is like lazier than Scrabble or lazier than watching a movie? Because it's arguably like in that very specific setting with like Mario Party or Mario Kart as an example, it's definitely the more social of the activities. But in my opinion, I think there is a good argument for like, why don't you actually go to your friend's house?
I think that's that's a good argument against video games. It's like, why don't you actually like take your bike and go hang out with your friend?
Yeah, but that's back to the original thing of like, go touch grass, right? Like,
yes,
but that's like a different argument than.
I think it is a different argument. Yeah. So what I would say to Brett's point is I think that is insane. I think like Scrabble is made to be enjoyable, and people should only play Scrabble if they want to play Scrabble. Like Scrabble is not like an edifying experience in and of itself. And I think, yeah. So I think like the fact that there might be some hostility. First of all, I think that's different now. Like I think like family game nights and like board games, like Jackbox. I think there's a lot of games that blur that line.
Maybe I just have a really
like
boring
Party
family.
Jackbox.
I don't know. Maybe this is just me
No.
trauma dumping.
No, I was gonna say like I think this is where we get back to the generational thing, because if I look at my parents, I think like, and specifically my mother, who is truly like the head of our household, her view of video games is like not a very positive one. And as I think for her, the idea was that like video games for her were of low value.
Sure.
And I think she held video games at like a lower value than watching television.
Got you.
So like if we were to do like quite literally anything else, she would be much much happier. Like she would be a lot happier for us to be like reading a book or quite literally. So I think we were in middle school, and our rule growing up was we were allowed to play video games only on the weekends. So Friday after school through Sunday 6 p.m., not before 8 a.m. and not after 8 p.m. Those were the only times we were allowed to play video games during the week. And not any weekdays, not any school days. And then, but summer was free reign. And I specifically remember one summer, my mom was like, okay, July, no video games at all. So she just cut us off for a whole month. And she was like, find something else to do. I don't care what. Because for her, like, it's such a low value activity.
Got you.
Even like the multiplayer game aspect of it. And like, she was fine if she's like, I'm not going to enforce this if you want to like go over a friend's house. But I think that's to the point where like she views it as like an isolating activity where like my kids could be doing something else, but they're just sitting around playing video games.
So this is interesting because my parents were not like that. My mom actively enjoyed video games, and we made it through like Star Fox Adventures and Fire Emblem together.
This is why we need to do the mom episode.
Yeah, okay, so here's the thing. My mom never questioned if video games were art. Like that was never like a question to my mom. And I think because my mom has kind of like, my mom likes comic books. She loved the X-Men. Mm-hmm. And she liked the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. And so like Poppy, and like we would talk about, I remember having like my mom like explaining to me why Magneto being from the Holocaust was like an important part of his character. So my mom, like she kind of likes nerd culture. Mm-hmm. And so like video games were just like another expression of that. And so there was never a question of like, are these valuable or are these artistic or are these like capable of like having like some kind of like poetic or existential value. It was always assumed that video games did have that. So I don't think I have the thing that you guys do, where like the question of like, are video games art? Because like there's other members of my community that thought video games were gay, but that's because I grew up in like a really weird small town. Huh. And so like there's other issues about like what, but they would also think that painting was gay. Because again, I grew up in a really weird small town. So like video games weren't unique in any way, like from other art forms. So like the idea, like the whole Robert Eggert's like video games are not art because you have a goal at the end. Like that whole argument just was never part of my growing up or like taken seriously for me as a child. Cause yeah, my mom, like she wasn't like a video game essayist or anything like that, but she still like never, and like the same thing with like playing cards, like card game, like Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon and like things like that. Like my mom always like was supportive of like appreciating and like delving deeper into art and things like that. So my mom would tell me to go outside because I've been playing indoors too much. But if I was already inside doing something sedentary, there was no hierarchy of activity.
So this kind of goes back to, I guess, like the beginning of the episode where your parents were more of the Adam Savage view of like, no, it's like your kid's really interested in this. You should just like encourage their interests and make sure that they're doing what they want to be doing. Because if you try to force them into doing something that they're not interested in doing, they're just going to bounce off it and do the other thing instead. Whereas, you know, I don't know. Yeah, so that's really interesting to like just hear everyone's like different. I guess like Seth was more on the strict side. Dempsey was definitely more on the free side. I was in a weird limbo where I don't really know where I sat, but my mom also didn't understand video games and stuff. Like I was just thinking, Seth, during when you were talking, like my mom would ground me and send me to my room, but I had like a CRT and my Xbox in my room, and she would just like unplug them. So she would come in, she's like, you're grounded and no video games. And she would just like pull the cord out of the wall. And I'm like, no, how could you do that? And then she closes the door. I plug them back in, mute the TV, and just continue playing video games. So it's like, yeah, every time my mom, quote unquote, took away games for a time, it was always like, oh no, I'm unplugging it. It doesn't exist anymore. And I'm like, no. Meanwhile, you know, I just, yeah. So anyways.
I think
my mom also let me watch Saw in second grade.
Okay.
So like,
I also did, but that was not my mom. That was, yeah, psychotic step-siblings.
Like my mom has like a very lax view of like, isn't this awesome?
That's so
that
funny.
explains
I
a
love
lot
that.
about you, actually.
Can your mom adopt me, please?
So
Yeah.
I think a lot of the onus also coming from my mother, though, is just like a desire for balance. Because I think given the opportunity, like my brother and I would only play video games.
Sure.
And I think that sort of plays into the like, this thing is designed for engagement. But I also kind of imagine that this has been, like, if it wasn't video games, it would have been something else. If I was around like 50 years before this, I'd probably be really into model trains, which is concerning about my psycho profile. But like, you know, or I would have been doing like I'd be learning like model soldier rules. And I'd be like stuck in the basement.
Instead, you're playing Warhammer, which is totally different than either of these things.
Yeah, totally different.
So,
but like, you know, if it wasn't one thing, it would have been another thing in my life. And I think a lot of that, again, was my mother's desire to be like, okay, given the opportunity, I observe you come home from school on Friday, you play video games until 8. On Saturday, you play video games from 8 to 8. And then on Sunday, you play like 8 to 6. So if I just let you go, like, you're never going to burn yourself out. So like, I'm going to force you to like do other things, which like I recognize as being like healthy and good.
Sure.
And I mean, it sounds like a strict system, but again, like I think my brother and I, it would be the only thing we ever did or wanted to do. So
yeah,
it was good on sort of tempering that. And, you know, it's conversations that as my fiance and I are planning on getting married later in the year. And you know, we want to have children sometime in the next half decade, at least. You know, the sort of loose conversation about like, what are we going to do with our kids and electronics?
Yeah.
You know, like we're thinking about like, what's an appropriate age for a kid to like have technology that they use on their own? Like, you know.
Yeah, like a lot of my friends
let our toddler
and like family have like kids and like toddlers especially, and it's like, at what point do you give them screen time? At what point? And this is an entirely different conversation, but it's
and like
there's a lot of things
like,
to consider with a lot of this.
But I think if the greater part of this conversation is like, what is the value of these things, and like what's the value of video games versus like other forms of media or like other forms of entertainment, it's going to play into that conversation, because like I really like video games and I have a lot of screen time, and I obviously like when I have kids, I am going to want to like play games with my kids.
Sure.
But like, how do you moderate that, and like what kind of value does that media have for me? But also like I want my kid to be able to read. So like I probably need to like read them books and engage them with music, but like
Sure.
I think that's the difference between my parents and I, is that video games are going to be part of, and I guess this is my closing thought, video games are going to be part of like the canon of media that I introduce to my children. Yeah. Because to me, it's a form of entertainment that I find value in. And I just...
Sure, the same thing as watching Finding Nemo or something like that.
Sure, like, I will undoubtedly, like, I'll have a toddler, like, sitting on my lap, and I'll be, like, playing games with them while they, like, watch me play on the computer, or they watch me, like, play on the PlayStation. Because it's a form of media engagement that I really enjoy, and it's a thing I want to pass down to my kids, because I find it valuable. I think my mother is a person who does not find video games valuable at all. So, like, I played a little bit of video games with my dad, and I think my dad used to play a lot more video games before we had kids, and I think my mother was like, cut it out. I don't want you playing all these video games.
I guess, like, final thoughts then, is I'm curious to see, I guess, like, when our, you know, like I said, a lot of my friends and stuff have toddlers at this point, and I'm curious to see what the next generation is going to be like in comparison to our parents, because I think a lot of me and my friends have a very similar story in terms of, you know, video games are a waste of time, or like we'd rather you go watch a movie, or like go read a book, which is just as sedentary. Sure. So I think I'm more curious, like, give it like 10 years, you know, when I'm 40, I'm curious to see what, you know, what our rules are, what everyone's rules are, kind of like if the mentality has shifted more towards like, no, video games can be just as rewarding as reading a book. I mean, like, I would rather spend 40 hours playing God of War Ragnarok than reading a book a lot of the time. So, I mean, yeah. So I think that's just a closing thoughts.
Ragnarok is good, though.
Yeah, true. So that's been a podcast, I guess. Unless you have something else.
Well, I wanted to say that I think our generation, because we on average don't have kids as early as generations prior, I do think that's fundamentally changing how these conversations are happening and even what art means to us. I watched a video essay about Death Stranding, and I forgot, like, parenthood is like a main theme of that game.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like that, like he literally has a fetus on his chest for the entirety of that game, and like you soothe it. But, like, because I am not a parent and, like, parenthood isn't, like, a thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about, it's just, like, not a theme that I connected with or cared about as I played that game. But, like, and so I think that, like, I mean, this is definitely my closing thought. But I do think that, like, the questions of, like, the human experience and, like, how parenthood impacts the human experience, I think our generation is, like, uniquely unqualified to wrestle with that in a way that, like, maybe previous generations would have seen it as, like, you cannot not wrestle with those questions.
Interesting.
And so I think, like, asking, like, how we would expect our kids to handle this or something like that, it just, like, puts in a perspective that I don't ever ask myself.
Fair enough.
So anyways, but that's my closing thought.
All right. Well, Dempsey's sick. I'm scared to do the outro, but this has been Overthinking Games, a podcast about what video games can teach us. If you have a question or have any thoughts on how your parents restricted or did not restrict video games, send us an email. Email is in the show notes. You can find us online on, let's see, Instagram, Bluesky. Are we on Twitter? Are we on Threads? We're on Threads.
We're not on Twitter.
Okay, we're not on Twitter.
Not on Twitter. We are on Blue Sky,
that.
But we are on Threads.
Sick. Find us on YouTube. We're doing some good content over on the YouTubes. And dang, I think that's it.
Emails in the show notes. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.